The last time Eastman Kodak built its own instant camera system, Polaroid sued. Kodak was forced out of the market. 16.5 million cameras were left without future Kodak film, and the company eventually paid Polaroid over $900 million. So how did the Kodak name end up back on an instant camera? And what had to change inside it? The answer begins more than 80 years ago with a question from a 3-year-old girl. In 1943, Edwin Land was photographing his family during a vacation when his daughter, Jennifer, asked why she couldn't see the picture immediately. It sounded like a child's question, because it was, but Land took it seriously. A normal photograph had to be developed somewhere else. Land imagined compressing that entire process into a camera and its film, so the photographer could take a picture and hold the finished print only moments later. The idea came quickly, but making it a reality took years. From 1943 through 1946, the project was kept secret inside Polaroid's laboratories. Land's team had to create a film unit containing both a negative and a positive receiving sheet, joined to a sealed pod of liquid reagent. After the exposure, the photographer would pull the two sheets through a pair of rollers. The pressure would burst the pod and spread the reagent into a thin, even layer between them. About a minute later, the negative could be peeled away to reveal the finished print. The basic sequence was simple to describe, but making it reliable wasn't. The reagent had to spread evenly across the entire picture. The film had to remain stable for months before it was used, work in both summer heat and winter cold, produce a sharp image, and then stop its own chemical reactions before they destroyed it. Polaroid spent more than 3 years turning Land's idea into a working laboratory system. On February 21, 1947, Land finally demonstrated that system at a meeting of the Optical Society of America in New York City. In front of the audience, the prototype produced a sepia photograph in about a minute. Newspapers described the invention as revolutionary. But a successful demonstration still wasn't a camera Polaroid could manufacture by the thousands. The company spent much of the following year adapting the film, chemicals, camera, and rollers for commercial production. Then on November 26, 1948, the Polaroid Model 95 went on sale at the Jordan Marsh department store in Boston. The small first shipment sold out that day. The process looked simple from the outside. Inside the film, temperature, pressure, timing, chemistry, and the thickness of the liquid layer all had to work together. The camera, film, rollers, and chemicals weren't separate products. They were one photographic system. As Polaroid expanded instant photography in the years that followed, one of its most important suppliers was Kodak. Kodak supplied Polaroid with photographic negative material beginning in the early 1950s. In 1957, the companies signed an agreement that brought them even closer. Polaroid shared parts of its developing color technology, while Kodak helped create and manufacture a suitable color negative. On Polaroid's side, much of that work grew from research led by chemist Howard Rogers. His team had spent years developing dye developers, compounds that helped develop the image while also supplying its color. That research led to Polacolor in 1963, and instant photography was no longer limited to black and white. Around the same time, the company's regular research meetings ended, although Kodak continued supplying negative material. Meanwhile, Polaroid wanted to eliminate the last awkward parts of the process, pulling the film from the camera, timing the development, and peeling the photograph apart. Edwin Land's goal was what he called absolute one-step photography. In 1968, Polaroid told Kodak it was developing a radically different kind of film. The companies discussed licensing and continued cooperation, but no agreement followed. In April of 1969, Kodak announced that it would end the partnership. Kodak had spent years helping to manufacture part of Polaroid's system. Now it intended to build an instant system of its own. Polaroid reached Land's one-step goal first. Released in 1972, the SX70 was a folding camera that developed and ejected each photograph automatically. There was no tab to pull, no separate timer, and nothing to peel apart. The picture came out of the camera and developed in daylight. What looked like a small white square was actually a remarkably complicated machine. SX70 film contained 17 layers, including light-sensitive materials, dyes, timing layers, a chemical pod, and an opaque barrier that protected the developing image after it left the camera. The camera had its own motor, gears, film pick, and processing rollers. When the shutter fired, a pick pushed one film unit out of the pack. The rollers burst the chemical pod, spread the reagent into a controlled layer, and sent the picture into daylight. Polaroid hadn't merely improved instant film. It had established what consumers now expected an instant camera to be. But Kodak's own instant photography program was already underway. It had begun in early 1969 and eventually split into two approaches: Kodak film for Polaroid cameras and a complete Kodak camera and film system. When Kodak examined the SX70, it understood the problem. Its existing plans were suddenly behind the market. The new camera didn't begin Kodak's research program. It forced the company to redirect and intensify it with a difficult requirement: create a competing one-step camera without crossing Polaroid's patents. Kodak didn't simply copy an SX70 and change the name. It explored different film structures, dyes, chemical systems, packs, motors, rollers, and ways of moving the photograph through the camera. The first approach would have produced Kodak film for Polaroid cameras. Kodak abandoned it near the end of 1972 after spending about $94 million. The company then concentrated on the complete Kodak camera and film system. At its peak, between 1,300 and 1,400 people worked on the project. They struggled with dyes that faded, chemicals that had to remain stable for months and then react in seconds, film that curled as it developed, and mechanisms that had to move one delicate sheet without exposing or damaging the rest. Kodak also created an extensive patent clearance program. Lawyers and engineers studied Polaroid's claims and repeatedly altered the designs. Kodak believed it had found its own route through the same maze. In April of 1976, Kodak launched the EK4 and EK6 cameras with PR10 instant film. And less than a week later, Polaroid filed a lawsuit against them. The legal battle would not fully end until 1991, but its first phase wasn't a fight over who owned the general idea of an instant photograph. It came down to specific inventions hidden inside the film and camera. In 1985, the court found that Kodak infringed valid claims in 7 Polaroid patents. 5 involved the film's chemistry or structure. 2 involved the way a sheet of film traveled through the camera. 3 examples explain why designing around Polaroid was so difficult. First, the photograph had to develop after it emerged into daylight. Polaroid's film created a temporary opaque barrier inside the picture, protecting the light-sensitive layers while the image formed. Later, that barrier became transparent so the finished photograph could be seen. Second, development had to stop at the correct moment. A special polymeric acid layer gradually reduced the film's alkalinity. That controlled the timing of the chemical reactions and helped prevent the colors from continuing to change. And third, the camera had to remove exactly one thin film unit from a tightly packed stack. Polaroid's solution used a pick entering from the rear of the cassette to push one sheet toward the rollers. That avoided openings near the front of the pack where stray light could damage the film. Kodak's products were different in many ways, but patent infringement doesn't require an entire product to be identical. It only requires a product to fall within the protected claims. After years of trial and appeal, the courts concluded that Kodak had crossed 7 of those invisible lines. There is one important qualification. A later court found that Kodak's infringement wasn't willful. The company had made an extensive effort to avoid Polaroid's patents and genuinely believed it had succeeded, but in reality, it hadn't. On January 9, 1986, the injunction took effect. Kodak stopped making instant cameras and film, recalled unsold products, and withdrew from the business. By then, it had sold roughly 16.5 million instant cameras. Those cameras didn't stop working when the court ruled, but Kodak could no longer make or sell the film they required. Existing supplies remained for a time, and compatible Fujifilm was available in some overseas markets. But for most owners, the cameras were now on a path toward permanent obsolescence. Kodak offered compensation, including stock, replacement cameras, and rebate books. A consumer class action followed, leading to a larger settlement for millions of American owners. Some claimants were required to remove and return the nameplate from the front of their camera. The patent damages were even larger. In 1990, a judge awarded Polaroid just over $909 million, including interest. A calculation error was later corrected, reducing the judgment to about $873 million. By the time the company settled in 1991, another $52 million in interest had accumulated, bringing Kodak's final payment to $925 million. Kodak had spent enormous sums trying to enter instant photography, built a quarter of the American market, and then lost the product, the customers, and one of the most expensive patent battles of its era. For the next few decades, a new Kodak instant camera seemed unlikely. The patent defeat didn't end Kodak. The company continued for more than 2 decades, but the shift from film to digital photography eventually transformed its business. Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in 2012 and emerged the following year as a smaller company focused mainly on commercial imaging and printing. The Kodak name still carried enormous value, so brand licensing became an important part of the business. In 2016, a South Korean printer company called Prinics received a global license to put the Kodak brand on photo printers and instant cameras. Prinics released the first Kodak Mini Shot in 2017. The Mini Shot 3 Retro, including this C300R, followed around 2020. So this is a genuine licensed Kodak product. But Eastman Kodak didn't design or manufacture it. Prinics did, and that explains only half of the mystery. The other half is inside the camera, because this machine doesn't use anything resembling Kodak's old PR-10 film. The old Kodak and Polaroid cameras exposed a piece of film, burst a pod of reagent, and carried out a chain of chemical reactions inside the photograph. But the process for this camera starts with a digital sensor. The image can be reviewed on the display before any paper is used, and unwanted photographs can be discarded without wasting a print. It can even receive a picture from a phone over Bluetooth. The rest of the machine is a miniature dye-sublimation printer. The actual camera module is only one part of the device. Much of the space is devoted to the cartridge, motor, gears, rollers, sensors, ribbon drive, and thermal print head. To make a photograph, the machine has to pick up one sheet of paper and move it through the print mechanism 4 separate times. The first pass transfers yellow dye. The second adds magenta. The third adds cyan. And a fourth pass applies a transparent protective coating. Instead of using liquid chemistry to develop a hidden image, the thermal head uses heat to build a visible one from layers of dye. That's how the Kodak name returned to instant photography. It didn't return by reviving the system that lost to Polaroid. It returned through a licensing agreement on a digital camera that contains a compact color printer. And yet one old problem remains. Before either system can produce a photograph, it has to select one delicate sheet from a stack and move it through a precisely controlled path. Polaroid patented a solution to that problem. Kodak infringed it. And decades later, this camera is reporting a failure at that same basic task. Photo pickup failed. So I guess once the camera became a printer, an error message was inevitable. Edwin Land's promise was simple. Take a photograph and hold it moments later. Polaroid fulfilled it with chemistry. The modern camera fulfills it with a sensor, electronics, heat, and a licensed name. Almost everything inside the instant camera changed, but the promise stayed the same. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider supporting the channel by liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.